So far, in this series, every piece of state we've built has lived inside a single component or gotten passed down through props. But what happens when 5 components deep in your tree all need the same piece of data, like the current user or a theme setting? You could pass it down as a prop through every single layer. That's called prop drilling, and it gets messy fast. React's answer to this is the Context API. Today we're covering what context actually solves, how to create and type it properly in TypeScript, and the custom hook pattern almost every production codebase uses to consume it safely. Let's get into it. 1. The problem, prop drilling. Imagine an app where the current logged-in user needs to show up in a header, a sidebar, and a settings panel. 3 components buried at different depths in the tree. Function app, const user, name Asha, role admin. Return layout user, welcome. Function layout is user, return layout user. Kayla header user, sidebar user, welcome. Function sidebar user, return settings user. Notice layout and sidebar don't actually use user themselves. They only accept it as a prop to forward it further down. That's prop drilling, passing data through components that don't care about it, just to reach the ones that do. In a small app, this is annoying. In a real app with 6 or 7 levels of nesting, it becomes a maintenance nightmare. Rename the prop, and you're editing 10 files. 2. Creating a context. React's Context API lets us skip the drilling entirely. Any component can subscribe directly to a value, no matter how deep it is. Let's build one for our user example, and type it properly. Import createContext from React. Interface user, name, string, role, admin, and member. Const user context is createContext user or undefined. A few things to unpack here. CreateContext user or undefined. Undefined. We type the generic as user or undefined, not just user. That's deliberate. The undefined default represents no provider found above this component in the tree. If we typed it as just user, TypeScript would let us call properties on a value that might not actually exist at runtime. We'll turn that undefined into a real runtime safety check in a few minutes, with a custom hook. This pattern, union with undefined plus a guard later, is the standard type-safe way to create context in TypeScript. It's a little more setup than JavaScript, but it means you can never accidentally use the context outside of its provider, without TypeScript or your code warning you. The provider component, context by itself doesn't do anything. It needs a provider that actually supplies the value, and wraps the part of the tree that should have access to it. Import VI, createContext, use state, React node, from React. Interface user, name string, role, admin, member. Interface user context value, user or null. Login user to void. Logout to void. Const user context, createContext user context value or undefined. Undefined. Function user provider, children, React node. Const user to null, null. Const login is user to set user. Const logout is to set user, null. Return under user context provider value, user, logout, logout. Export user context, user provider. A couple of TypeScript details worth pausing on, children, React node. This is the correct type for anything React can render, and it's what lets user provider wrap arbitrary JSX. Notice the context value itself is now an object. User, login, logout, not just the raw user. This is the common real-world shape. State plus the functions to update it, bundled together and typed with one interface, user context value. Now we wrap our app once, at the top. Function app, return user provider, layout. Every component inside layout, no matter how deep, can now reach into user context directly. No more drilling. Consuming context safely, the custom hook pattern. Here's the naive way to consume this context, using React's built-in useContext hook directly. Import useContext from React. Function header. Const context is useContext user context. Return hello context username. TypeScript error. TypeScript immediately complains, and it's right to. Context has the type user context value or undefined, because that's what we passed as the default to create context. TypeScript can't know for certain a provider exists above this component, so it won't let us access .user without a check. The fix almost every production app uses is a tiny custom hook that does the check once, in one place, and throws a clear error if it's missing. Function useUser, user context value. Const context is useContext user context. If context is undefined, throw new error useUser must be used within a user provider. Return context. Now look what happens in the component. Function header, const user, return hello, comma user, comma name, path, button on click logout. User is typed as user null here. No undefined anymore, because user's return type is user context value, guaranteed. TypeScript is happy, and if some future teammate forgets to wrap a route in user provider, they get an immediate readable runtime error, instead of a silent bug where the app just renders nothing. Why this pattern matters. It centralizes the undefined check in one hook, instead of repeating it in every consuming component. It gives components a fully typed value, no optional chaining sprinkled everywhere out of defensive habit. The thrown error message tells you exactly what's missing and where, which saves real debugging time in a large app. 5. A second example, typed theme context with useReducer. Context pairs especially well with useReducer once your state has more than one or two possible updates. Let's build a theme context as a second example, so you see the pattern generalize. Type theme equals light, dark. Interface theme state. Theme. Type theme action. Type toggle. Type set. Payload theme. Function theme reducer. State. Action. Theme action. Switch action type. Case toggle. Return theme. State times light, dark. Case set. Return theme action payload. Default return state. Interface theme context value. Extends theme state. Dispatch React dispatch. Theme action. Const theme context is createContext. Deem context value or undefined. Function theme provider. Children React node. Const state dispatch equals useReducer theme reducer. Theme light. Return theme context provider value AAPL state. Dispatch theme context provider. The action type, a union of object shapes, each with its own type tag, is the standard way to type reducer actions in TypeScript. It means the switch statement inside the reducer gets full autocomplete and type narrowing on action.payload based on which branch you're in. And React dispatch theme action is the correct type for the dispatch function itself. You'll see that exact type whenever you expose a reducer's dispatch through context. The consuming hook follows the exact same shape as before. Function useTheme, theme context value, const context equals useContext theme context. If context is undefined, useTheme must be used within a theme provider. Return context. 6. Common pitfalls recap. 4 mistakes to watch for with context in TypeScript. Typing createContext with just the value type, instead of value or undefined. This silently defeats the safety check the custom hook is supposed to give you. Skipping the custom hook and calling useContext directly everywhere, you lose the single point of validation, and every component ends up with optional chained, partially typed data. Overusing context for state that changes very frequently, like form input on every keystroke. Every consumer re-renders on every update, which can hurt performance. Context is best for state that's broadly needed, but changes relatively infrequently, like auth, theme, or locale. Putting everything in one giant context. Split unrelated state, user, theme, cart, into separate contexts, so components only re-render for the data they actually use. 7. Conclusion. That's the context API in TypeScript. Why it exists, how to type it so the compiler actually protects you, and the custom hook pattern that makes it safe and pleasant to consume anywhere in your tree. If this helped, drop a like, subscribe, share it with someone learning React. And I'll see you in the next one.